This is Josh Garrell, first-time caller, long-time listener, and resident at the Level Health House. You're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. In our ongoing quest to seek out fellow design podcasts, we've talked with folks like Francis Anderton, Donna Sink, Steve Chung, Josh Cooperman, David Lee and Marina Bourdonnais, the Midnight Charette folks, and Debbie Millman. Today, we talk with Bob Borson, creator of the most visited privately maintained architectural blog in the world, Life of an Architect, which as of 2 years ago is also a podcast. And now your host, the guy who used to think fenestration required a local anesthetic, George Smart.
Hi, folks. Fenestration.
Ouch.
This medical-sounding term, which for you mere mortals like me, means the arrangement of windows and doors on a building. Does sound painful, doesn't it?
For the building.
A few years ago, I think I had a colon fenestration, which involved opening a window to my large intestine and lots of foul-tasting beverages. The upside is the drugs they give you to knock you out, either Valium or Demerol, are really delightful. I laughed, I cried, I would certainly do it again. And there was a studio audience for my fenestration, which is a story for another time. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Modernist Realtor Angela Roll and by Nichiha.com.
Beauty, love, durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good. And you love feeling this good. Nichiha, 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 Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Nichiha, Nichiha, Nichiha. That's N-I-C-H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
We have been trying to get our guest today on for, I guess, maybe a year. He's the Matt Damon to my Jimmy Kimmel. There were scheduling issues on both sides, and it's great to finally have him on the show. I first encountered Bob's blog in 2012 when he put out a wonderful series of architecture Christmas cards, which we will talk about later. Dallas architect Bob Borson is newly with BOKA Powell after working as a principal with Malone Maxwell Borson Architects, where he was a partner. That Borson in the title is your first clue. Bob is the highly recognized creator of Life of an Architect, one of the world's most popular architecture blogs engaging both architects and the public on what it's like to work with and be an architect. Bob went to design school at the University of Texas at Austin and was the Dallas AIA Young Architect of the Year in 2009. He became a National Fellow, a high honor, which is like Old Architect of the Year, in 2017, a mere 8 years later. In the same year, he turned Life of an Architect into a podcast, and I'm definitely a fan. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, guys. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so glad to finally get you here.
I know it's been a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We had all kinds of things come up with both of us, and rescheduling, and you've changed jobs now, and there's lots of new things on the frontier.
Everybody's very busy and very important. That
Yes.
sounds impressive.
Very impressive. We are so impressive. It's like Jimmy Kimmel and Matt Damon. We have engagements to go to, right?
Exactly.
Bob, when did you know that you wanted to be an architect to start off with?
Well, I'll give you the short version. I was 5 years old, and I didn't know what an architect was, but my dad had, for Christmas, gave me a drafting board, a yellow, an orange triangle, and a T-square. And I didn't know what any of those things were. But I looked at this. I ran my hands over this beautiful drafting board, which was really just kind of a piece of wood. And it was beautiful. And I looked at my dad, and I said, I'm going to make a boat out of this piece of wood. And he goes, no, that's not what that's for. This is a drafting board. So my dad was an engineer, and I'm not sure that he thought by giving me this that I would go the architecture route. Maybe he was trying to get me on that engineering route early. But once he started explaining it, it didn't take long for me to go, this is the route I think I'm going to take.
What did you do as a kid? Did you draw things by hand or build things? Or
I was pretty crafty. I'd build a lot of things. I actually had a friend of mine that lived in my street. We built a fort in his backyard when we were I was probably 8 and he was 10. It actually had foundation. It had a wood deck on it, and it was 2 stories. And I had a great time with it. But other than that, I didn't, as you can imagine, I get a lot of emails from people that ask me questions, and they start off their questions with saying, well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. And they all have the same backgrounds. They all think it's unique, but it's not. We all played with Legos. Some of us are old enough to have played with Lincoln Logs, erector sets. All that stuff is kind of in the background, and just like everyone else, I did those same things.
I played with Legos, too. I couldn't get enough of them. And there was a short-lived version of the Lego, a knockoff, called Toggles. They were around for a little while.
Now, are you dating yourself here?
I am dating myself a little bit. Toggles were bigger than Legos, and you could do things that were like bigger projects. They were probably, each block was maybe twice or 3 times the size of a normal Lego.
Not like those Duplo blocks that they let the preschoolers take.
No.
Too big for you to fit in your mouth.
No, you could swallow a toggle if you really tried.
Okay.
But the Toggles had these little doors in them that you could open up the side of a cube and make things hinge. That was their little interesting item. And I spent months and months in playing with that kind of stuff, but it didn't get me into architecture like we did with Bob. So where was your next exploration of this, Bob? Did it come out in a choice of college, or did you get that later on in life?
Well, I took drafting in high school, which the irony was when I finally did go to college, they made it a point to tell everyone that the first year of architecture school was just them training out of you all the bad habits your drafting teacher taught you in high school.
Oops.
Yeah. But I ended up going to the University of Texas down in Austin. And the irony of that is I didn't even realize how good a school it was until after I'd gone there. And, getting into college now is a much different experience than it was back in the mid-'80s when I went. I didn't even apply anywhere else other than UT, not realizing that it was, I think at the time, it was the top 5 program in the nation. And somehow I managed to get in.
This is the school that is famous for Harwell Hamilton Harris and the Texas Rangers?
I believe it is, yes. There's lots of people I think it's famous for.
Yeah. They were a gang of kind of radical modernists back in the 50s.
Did they have tattoos?
You would know.
Yeah, I don't know if they have tattoos. I don't know. Do modernists have tattoos? That is not
Probably
caught
not
on
in the
yet.
50s.
Yeah. Where did you go from there? Did you intern while you were in school, or did you wait until leaving upon graduation to work someplace?
I had a couple of intern jobs when I was in college, but nothing really to speak of, nothing that kind of shaped or formed any kind of pattern to what I did later in life. My parents were of the financial opinion that they provided their children with everything they needed but nothing they wanted. And so, they paid for me to go to school, which I will be eternally grateful for, but I didn't get any spending money. So I had to work anytime that I was not in school. And, the economy was not spectacular in the late 80s and the early 90s. it really wasn't that much better off than what we went through in the 2008 to 2011 here just recently.
Yeah.
So I worked at a couple of places. One was a small firm, and actually on my first day on the job, I had to mow the grass. That was my first job.
That's pretty low down the
Was
totem
that your
pole.
landscape design rotation?
That's right. I got a continuing education credit for landscaping.
Excellent.
And then I worked for a larger firm in their construction administration department, but all I did was log submittals in and out and move things from point A to B to C to D. I didn't actually do any real work. I was just kind of labor.
It's like you had to pay your dues.
Yeah, that's and I have no doubt that that's probably formed a lot of the opinions that I have about interning and what that process looks like and what kind of value do these kids get out of the experience when they come in the office. I know that at my last office, when we had summer interns, they did real work. We put them to work. There was no filing of magazines or cleaning up of dead filing drawings. I mean, we got them in front of the computers. We said, this is what your task is, and we billed for their time. It wasn't much, but we wanted to expose them to what the real practice was, not this kind of outdated mentality of, hey, I had to do it, this worthless garbage period,
Right.
and you have to do it too.
You've talked about the trials and tribulations of internships several times on your blog.
Yeah, a few times.
And most people don't know that inside a number, not all, of particularly large companies, sometimes people are toiling away even without getting paid.
I hear about that, and I know in some instances that get publicized that is true, but honestly, it's a deplorable practice that I hope is being shut down. I've never participated in that. We've never asked anybody to work for free, and quite honestly, when people email me questions and they say, I have a great opportunity to go work for the such and such architect, but they're not going to pay me, and I always say, why would you devalue your services in that way? If they don't think highly enough to pay you for your time, what does that say about you if you're willing to take a job where they don't pay you for your time?
When did you start blogging?
2010. I think the actual date was January 14th.
Oh.
I know. Are you impressed that I actually know the date?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years now. Over
Yeah.
10 years.
Now, did you find that the pressure to produce kept you busy? A lot of blogs make it about 6 entries, and then the next entry is 3 years later.
I didn't ever fall in that particular trap. When I started, I had no shortages of ideas or things to talk about. So for a while, I think I wrote about 3 articles a week for a year or two. And then I slowed it down to 2 a week for a couple of years. And it probably wasn't until year 6 or 7 that I went to just 1 article a week. And when I started the podcast last year, it's still technically 4 blog posts, but I do a blog post 1 week and then we release a podcast. And the show notes are essentially their own standalone blog post.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I actually told people, when I announced it on the site that I wanted to start this podcast, and the reason I started the podcast is, quite honestly, after 10 years, I find blogging a little boring. And I wanted a new challenge, right? I mean, it's the reason why I did it. It was a creative outlet. I started it in 2010, and it was because I had some free time on my hands because the economy wasn't killing it.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the traits that a lot of architects share is the strong belief in we learn by doing. So I ended up having a conversation with my friend, and he made a comment to me that I didn't understand. And it made me think, have I become stagnant in the creative process, like how I learn? Now I've settled in what I do. I think I'm pretty good at it. I understand what tools I need to get a product that I can predictably count upon. But I had been doing that for a couple of years, and I thought, maybe I need to step outside my comfort zone and learn something new. That's why it started.
Yeah. I mean, the basic difference, I guess, between a blog and a podcast is a blog is a monologue and a podcast is at least a conversation. And so there's synergy there.
Yes. You hope.
Yeah.
Tom, what do you think?
In your first couple of years, what blog posts got the most attention and interest from the public?
Well, that's a great question. And there's really more than one answer. The most straight-up answer was, in the beginning, the thing that really brought attention to my site is I wrote a blog post titled Top 10 Reasons to Be an Architect on one day, and the next day I published the top 10 reasons to not be an architect. And I went from getting about 50 or 60 or 70 people a day to getting about 800 or 900 a day very, very early. I think this was probably 2 months into the process.
Nice.
And I think for a lot of people who toil away, and now you got to keep in mind, in 2010, there wasn't a lot of competition for the bandwidth of architectural blogs, right? There just weren't a lot of people doing it. And so I got a lot of traffic really, really fast. And that early success, quite honestly, helped keep me motivated to stick with it, quite honestly.
Do you remember some of the reasons to be an architect or not?
For a long time, the most trafficked post was top 10 reasons not to be an architect, which I really hated because I really like being an architect, and I didn't want people to associate all these reasons to not be an architect with my site. You know, I didn't have any assurances that they were reading the companion piece, but the reality is that you could substitute the word architect for almost any other profession, and the reasons I gave for it being good or bad hold true for almost any job.
Even engineering, I bet.
Even engineering. I mean, I used to say doctor. You know, you could put doctor in here, and it had to do with you won't hang out with anybody except other architects. You know, and so it wasn't really specific to the practice of architecture, even though, since that's my perspective, that's the angle at which I came at it. But it didn't sit well with me for a while. And I actually wrote a follow-up. I think it was titled like Top 10 Reasons Why I Hate Top 10 Reasons Posts.
Yeah, but it sells magazines, you know, top 10 diet tips. So I'm not surprised your readership jumped.
I wonder if people still fall for that kind of clickbait type of titles. I certainly didn't mean it to be the type of enticement that those type of lists became in subsequent years. Nowadays, I think it's a little too formulaic, and people don't really get drawn in by the top 10 reasons to fill in the blank.
Right.
I don't know. You know, we all think we're immune to spam and clickbait, and we still click on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but I bet you click on less than you did a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
That is true. What other blogs did you follow at the time you started yours? I mean, what was out there at the time?
Well, there was a Daily Dose of Architecture, which I think it just goes by Daily Dose now. And actually, I don't even know if it's John Hill who writes it. As far as I know, he was the first architect to write an architectural blog site. I think he was, number one. But for the most part, there weren't many architectural blogs. And I say that knowing that there were probably some, but I can't recall any other than John.
Yeah.
So one of the things that always kind of rankled me a little bit, I reached out to a guy because that was something when I first started off, the advice that I read online was, reach out to other bloggers and maybe you can swap links. So there's a link to your site and you put a link to their site and that kind of stuff. And they put me in touch with this guy who wrote a residential kitchen and bath site. And I reached out to him, and it turns out that this guy was kind of a big deal. He was also one of the very first people that occupying this bandwidth in the AEC kind of blog sphere in the early days. And he started not only to help me by swapping links, he started promoting me to his group of people. And I started being asked to go speak, and I, really, really quick, take trips to go be, an influencer in places. Now a phrase which kind of makes me sick, but back then it meant something different than it does now.
It is funny how terminology has changed in just a few years. By the way, A Daily Dose of Architecture, the blog, is now gone and replaced with A Daily Dose of Architecture books, according to my phone and the Google.
Well, I know that John, who was a practicing architect at the time, has become an editor, and he writes books now. I don't think that he's not a practicing architect. And I'll tell you what, he's a super nice guy. I met him once, and I was up in New York for something, and he literally knows everything about New York City. You can walk down a street, and he can tell you, in 1950, 37 feet below our feet, a new water line was put in. He knows every building.
And you have no way without a jackhammer to prove him wrong.
Yeah, but the depth of knowledge is so profound that you would never question it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check him out. I have not seen that one yet.
Yeah. He does guidebooks and travel books for if you go to New York. This is like, here's a walking path of this neighborhood or that neighborhood, and they are spectacular.
Bob George is taking a little break checking his Mr. Modernism Instagram feed for the 32nd time of the day. So while he does that, we're going to have a word from modernist realtor Angela Roll. In a timeless adventure that we're largely making up, Angela supported her family from the age of 12 through black market carpentry and off-the-books house flipping. At the young age of 19, following an injury involving goat cheese, Jägermeister, Home Depot, and a slightly drunken Mies, Angela was recruited by her Uncle Marv, a design school operative working in Raleigh, North Carolina, of all places. Angela spent years imprisoned in nutrient and sleep-deprived architecture studios, tortured with balsa wood and styrofoam, rarely seeing the light of day. She was dramatically rescued and taken to Sweden by international man of mystery Eric of Guttenberg, whom she later married, and while sketching on a napkin over meatballs at IKEA, they were confronted by the Architecture Review Board. Angela narrowly escaped to North Carolina, via jetpack, of course, because all heroines have one, to become a formidable real estate agent with specialized design training, capable of brilliant advice to buyers and sellers of modernist houses. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Thank you, Tom. I'm back. 2 likes. Been a slow day.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Hey, Bob, about blogs. Are blogs kind of on our way out? Are we now a Twitter and 1-minute video society?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. My traffic has been declining over the last several years. And initially, I just kind of wrapped it up or, assigned that to the fact that I just don't write as much as I used to. It kind of makes sense. And the 2 timelines worked out that way. But I can see that the pattern of almost all new content that I know that I consume, because I still am a consumer of this architectural type of content, now I get it more from Instagram more than any other platform by a mile. And so everything's delivered in like 5-second chunks.
Yeah. Well, one of your classics, which I loved, was the Architect Christmas cards. Do you remember some of those?
I remember writing them.
They just had me laughing right there at the desk. These were little Christmas cards that you had sort of customized to some of the classic big names, like cards from Frank Lloyd Wright and Mies, and I think it was a Frank Gehry one, right?
Yeah, I had, every big architect I could think of, I found a picture of them, and I put some kind of Christmas message on it.
And they were very popular because they got copied all over the place.
Yeah, they kind of got picked up. I remember there was a picture of Leon Creer in profile, and I referenced him as the freeze miser. And, those were a lot of fun to do. I did them for a couple of years. And then, like all things, once you kind of travel down one particular creative path, you want to find something new. So I quit doing them after 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, they were definitely trending.
Yeah, well, I want to say there was a Lou Kahn one. No, it was an Alvar Aalto one, and I was talking about how Christmas trees needed to be laid out on a grid. And they were really insider. So if you were in architecture school, you understood, because if you could distill these guys down into one little stupid Christmas jingle bite, that's what I was going for when I wrote those.
Well, I happen to have a couple of them in front of me. There was one about architect Paul Rudolph, and his quote is, "You talk to Santa? You're wasting your time. The real power is with the elves." And
right,
then we've got architect Marcel Breuer, whose quote was, "Did you really say ornaments, as in ornaments?
Right.
And let's see, there's one more here from Philip Johnson. You've got a picture of him sitting in a Bertoia chair, and the quote is, "I'm not pouting. I just don't know why I always have to play the elf."
Okay, these are pretty inside.
This is very inside baseball, so you have to sort of to look at this. But you can, if you're listening to this by your computer and you want to find these things, type in Life of an Architect Christmas cards. And the specific one you're looking for is Christmas cards from famous architects. 2013, a classic in the Bob Borson series. Bob, what led you to think about a podcast?
New creative direction, quite honestly. The blog. I've written about 900 articles, and I don't want to say I'm running out of content, but it's not as entertaining for me. When I wrote it, I never wrote it for anyone else other than as a creative outlet and a way for me to entertain myself in my spare time. after a while, it started to feel like a chore, like there was an expectation. And I guess that's why I shouldn't have been surprised that when I wrote, I wrote the post I wrote on the blog when I announced we were going to start doing a podcast. It was actually me breaking up with my blog, and my blog was like an individual. And, I was saying that I was stepping out with somebody else, and the blog was mad because I was cheating.
But aren't you still seeing your blog on the side, Bob?
I know. We have an open relationship.
That's very French.
That's right.
Should give yourself more credit there.
Yeah.
I know. So I started the podcast just because I think there's a lot of nuances that are lost when it's just me sitting in front of a keyboard typing. It's Sunday night or Tuesday night or whatever it is when I have the time to write these things. And I wanted to have another person to kind of play off. And the truth is we can take some of the same topics that I covered, that I enjoyed covering on the blog, and reintroduce them in the conversation on the podcast.
Well, with that, tell us about your co-host, Andrew Hawkins.
So Andrew and I are really good friends. We've gone back an extremely long time. I mean, I think that he and I became really good friends probably about 2011. Granted, we weren't childhood friends, but from a professional standpoint, that's a pretty nice chunk of time. And Andrew and I started, he's in College Station. He's a professor down at A&M University, Texas A&M. And so we would only really get to spend time with each other at AIA functions at the state or the national level.
Because all these architects just hanging out with other architects. Yeah.
That's right. That's kind of what happens. You recharge your batteries and you hang out with people that think exactly like you do. So I started spending more and more time with Andrew, and we got along really, really well. And he kind of keeps me from getting too full of myself because, and this is really embarrassing to kind of say out loud and even worse to know that it's going on tape. Do you remember when the AIA National Convention was in Denver? This was probably 2014 or something like that. I couldn't walk through, that was like at the height of popularity for the blog site. And, of course, now this is my wheelhouse, right? Everybody who's at the convention, they're exactly the demographic that if you were going to read my website, that would be you. Like,
that's your
crowd.
core.
Yeah.
Core.
That's right.
Your gang. Your crew.
That's right. The crew. And so the number of times that people would come up and say, can I get your autograph or take a picture with you, or was staggering. And I honestly, I didn't handle it very well because I was like, I'm just a dude, right? I'm telling stories that we all have. I'm just the only one that's writing them down and putting them on the internet. I didn't feel like I was a particularly special or unique or creative individual. This just happened to be this blog that I had. It just was the way that it manifested itself at that moment. Well, when it became overwhelming, Andrew kind of became my handler. So he would be the guy that would swoop in and get me out of situations that I couldn't figure out how to get out of gracefully without maybe offending or hurting people's feelings,
Did you give him sunglasses and an earpiece? And a big, wide suit?
Well, you know how these conventions go. So Andrew and I, we would walk the showroom floor and people would come up. So he's standing right there, and after a while, he knows me well enough to read my body language. And I mean, the thing that would be funny about it is people come up and they'd say, oh, I love the blog. It's so great. And I'd go, thanks. It's really awesome. I really appreciate you reading it. And then they wouldn't have anything else. Like they never thought of a follow-up statement.
That's
and I'm just sitting there.
Just great, man.
Yeah, and I go, are you having a good show? And so now all of a sudden I'm trying to carry this conversation with someone that I don't know. And it's a byproduct of having the blog be set up the way it was. It was set up as a first-person narrative, so the people that read it, by design, it's like they're talking to me or I'm talking to them. It's very personal. And so they would walk up feeling like they already know who I am, yet I have no idea who they are. And so Andrew's job was to, whenever those kind of meetings started going off the rails, he would say, hey, Bob, you're supposed to be over here in 5 minutes. You got to go. Which I can't tell you how valuable that was in those early days.
So how big is your entourage now, Bob?
Oh, it's not nearly as big as it used to be, but I don't keep track of that sort of stuff.
I don't know if I read this or if it was on your podcast, but it stuck in my mind. You did a bucket list episode?
Yes.
About things that you want to do before you kick the bucket?
Yes.
What are some of those things?
Well, I've actually I did an architectural bucket list blog post, and it had to do with like places I wanted to go. But then Andrew and I brought it back up, and we decided to create new silos for an architectural bucket list. And it was things like, what architect do you want to hang out with? And then so part of our conversation might be, well, are you hanging out with this person because they're a great designer, they have tremendous business skills, you just think they're cool? You know, like what kind of criteria are you using to create your architectural bucket list buddy, right? And so we talked about that. And the funny thing about that is I chose Tom Kundig because I like his work. He did a lot of residential work, which at the time I was doing almost exclusively residential work. And the way that he goes about putting things together from a technical standpoint really resonated with my own design proclivities. In the podcast, I mentioned that I almost chose this architect, Omar Gandhi from Nova Scotia.
Now, is he out on Fogo?
I don't know.
Is he a Fogo Island guy?
No, I'm not sure where. He's got an office in Toronto, and he's got an office in Nova Scotia. But I said I didn't choose him because all the pictures of him, he looks like he's really intense and serious and wouldn't have time for my foolishness. He wrote me a letter like a week later, and it was so funny and clever, and how he acknowledged that he's too serious in his photos. And I thought, man, that's exactly the right way to handle it. So now I'm digital buddies with the guy who was my number 2 architectural bucket list.
That's great.
Yeah.
Are you going to have him on your show?
Yeah, actually, I told him I would love to have him on a show. We got to find the right topic, to get him on. And you know how it is trying to schedule these things.
That's true. Scheduling is an issue. Now, did you have also I have to say this like the British do, a Jaguar on your list?
A Jaguar. Yeah, I think that was on the blog site. And it had to do with my car. If I could have any car, the one I would want was I think a 1962 XKE.
Yeah.
I think, but it's the convertible. They're beautiful cars.
These are not cars; they're autos, and you
autos.
You go motoring.
That's exactly right.
I get the lingo right.
Yeah, that 1962 XKE, that was just a huge classic. I mean, particularly all the British Playboys and the James Bonds were driving those at the time.
Oh, I think I was drawing pictures of that in 3rd grade.
Yeah, I think you have to be a rogue to drive that kind of car.
A scoundrel?
Yeah.
Yeah, scoundrel.
I don't think the evil guys, all the evil lair guys had modernist houses, but they didn't have modernist cars. There usually was a Rolls Royce or a Bentley pulling up to your very modernist evil lair.
Right.
But the good guys had the Jaguars.
Well, you should note that the good guys always drove the car themselves, and the bad guys were always chauffeured.
Yeah, very good point. Yep.
Right.
And I think that's what makes the distinction in the car of choice.
So I guess
you'd never sit in the back seat of a Jaguar.
If there was
one, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you'd have to sit sideways.
I guess I better fire my chauffeur. Make me a better guy.
That's right. I have to handle Tom's fans, and it's a pain in the ass. It really, really is. In your former office, you talked about a lot that you tried to get people to, as architects who are prone to overwork themselves for various reasons, you encouraged people to have interest outside the office. You closed it on Fridays at noon. Has that carried over to your new firm, or are you bringing that along with you?
Well, no, the new firm, I had a conversation about that with them, not from here's the new guy coming in and, the new firm I work for is Boca-Powell. That's how you say that name, not B-O-K-A.
Oh, yeah, you spelled it out. I was wondering.
Boca-Powell, okay.
Yeah, it's Boca-Powell. And, there's 100 people here. They have a culture that is far more powerful than me as a pebble in that river that eddies changing, within 3 weeks of arriving. But I remember when I first started talking to them about it, they brought up the idea of culture and how does that work and how did the Friday afternoon shutdown work in my last office. And part of the difference is the last firm I worked at, we were very client-driven. And we did a lot of light commercial and a lot of residential work. And we tended to work when those people were not working, which did include nights and weekends. But the staff, the people that kind of came in and sat at their computers and would join us at meetings on occasion, they kept very regular hours. And we just made really sure that we didn't schedule deliverables in such a way that required people as a culture to have to work a 50-hour week every single week. If you do it occasionally, that's because you have a deadline. If you do it all the time, that's management.
Yeah.
And so we encourage people to get involved in activities, pick up a different set of skills, because we think it makes them better architects. You just being an architect all day long makes you better at the things you do. It doesn't give you new arrows for your quiver. And so at the new firm where I work, they don't have the same sort of mentality because a lot of their projects are developer-driven. I'm amazed at what this firm accomplishes in a very, very short amount of time. The work is amazing. And I would have looked at it, if you just put a project in front of me and say, hey, how long is the design exercise? Would it take you to go from a blank piece of paper to this amazing office tower? I'd say 5 months. And they would literally probably laugh and go, we did that in a week and a half.
Really?
Wow.
What's the secret?
Talent.
And, you know, the technology has just leaped ahead in putting these things together, too.
For sure. I mean,
It's
the
incredible.
technology that's in all these offices. You know, one of the reasons I had my name on the door of my last office, and it was a great office, and I loved it. I love those people. They're still doing amazing work. I left because this is really not too dissimilar from me writing a blog and starting a podcast. I wanted different challenges. You know, I'm 50 years old, and I got like one big move left in me. You know, it's what I'm thinking. I mean, I can't be changing stuff all the time. And I wanted to go to, in my opinion, you know, I'm in Dallas, which is a pretty big city. I wanted to go to the smallest big firm I could, or the littlest big firm, you know, however you want to look at it, so that I could try to get exposure to different type of work, different market sectors, but still have some of that, like everyone knows everyone's name. You know, like I can walk out. I've only been here 3 weeks, and I bet of the 100 people that are in the firm, I know by name and recognize probably 90% of them at this point.
Well, they certainly all know you, right?
You know, I don't know. You would think there's certainly some people that do know me, but then there's some people that, you know, they don't care. Like I said, I'm just a guy.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Bob, because this comes up a lot of time when people ask me this question, and I'm certainly not an architect, but you noted in the blog that most small design firms are terrible at sales and marketing. What can you tell small firms to do to get out there more and actually sell their work?
Well, I think architecture, it's a social profession. I think that the way that we talk with people, how we talk to people, the way we follow up on the things we do and the things that we say, that's what makes the difference. Because if you break down the work and you say, all right, I want a 5-bedroom, 5-bathroom house with a living kitchen, blah, 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 and it doesn't leak. Well, shouldn't every architecture firm that does that work be able to give you those things? You know?
Right. What's the differentiator?
Yeah, who cares? I mean, if your only requirement is X number of rooms at X number of square foot and it doesn't leak, well, every firm should be able to give you that. So what we talk about and what I specifically try to do is talk about the experience. You know, we're going to have fun. You're going to have a voice in the matter. This is your house. My job is to educate you so you can make the right decisions for how you want to live your life, not me designing to the lowest common denominator that you happen to fit within. And we want to do a house that's specific to you, not specific to most people that are out there.
The Life of an Architect podcast is available wherever fine podcasts are sold, which is most of the networks out there for free, right? On iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher and places like that. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm sorry it took so long. This was a great time.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Okay, Tom, close us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.6 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at george@usmodernist.org or on Instagram at mr.modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. our esteemed guests get thoroughly Googled by Chief Researcher Cindy Stratton, who wishes you all would stop waving to her on Facebook.
Yeah.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another episode of Life of a Non-Architect, a.k.a. U.S. Modernist Radio.